On hearing form is emptiness in our services on most Saturdays, like we will in a few minutes, one would rightly assume that this must be connected to meditation. Form here, in form is emptiness, refers to what the eyes see, but also what stands for external things that the other four senses pick up. What we hear, taste, touch, or smell, as well as thoughts, those objects of mind, of others and ourselves. Form thus stands for everything that exists in ordinary life, including our sitting at first, when we're beginning, while emptiness is what we experience when not having any things in our mind, such as towards the end of a period of meditation, or in a zazenkai, or sesshin. However, if this were the only meaning, that is, of form and emptiness, that is, what our experience is in meditation, it is doubtful that anyone would be sitting just because of the truth of this, that form is emptiness. But it might be of value for those whose minds, even in meditation, sometimes don't provide them moments of silence. Sitting does make us calmer, and having their minds slow down might provide sitters with enough reason to continue sitting. Certainly for those who meditate by themselves, none of you here, because here we are, but have never felt interest in Buddhism, emptiness would not have any further meaning beyond referring to what they don't experience during or after sitting. It would be form as emptiness would be of no significance in trying to figure out why we are unhappy or feel stuck in life. Legend has it that Prince Siddhartha Gautama had had such doubts after he had left his privileged palace existence for the first time and seen people suffering from sickness, old age, and death. He subsequently discovered that our problems are caused by having a mistaken belief in self, when in fact we are, like everyone and everything else, defined not by ourselves but by everything else. This being so, no one thing has self-nature, in that nothing intrinsically exists, and so cannot be said, no one can be said to have or a permanent self. Nevertheless, in believing in having a self, despite this, results in our suffering, such as by not getting what we want or getting what we don't want, our likes and dislikes. Bound by this sense of self to having a dissatisfying life, we think that we cannot escape. However, Buddha said that giving up our sense of self provides a way out of samsara to what he called nirvana. Later, Mahayana Buddhists identified this as having a Buddha nature that we and everyone else and everything else in the universe share, and it is who all things really are. For Zen Buddhists, all of this becomes clear after spending a good amount of time over the years in doing Zazen. Though seldom recognized early in our practice, the foreground of usual life is so dominated by the karmic needs of the self that there is little room to be much else. However, when the self and its karma have lost much of their power over us, a background of goodness in us suddenly becomes clear. And from then on, the negativity in our thoughts begins being regularly refuted by a positivity coming out of nowhere. which is emptiness. It is as if the angel, like the one once seen on cartoon character's shoulder, stopped losing out to the devil on the other side. This background that we have unexpectedly become aware of is, of course, Buddha nature, and is why it is so important for us to become accustomed to having an empty mind in sitting and to believing in our true nature before we have recognized that it is what we are part of. Form as emptiness, then, is representative of selfishness becoming selflessness, or samsara becoming nirvana, or the relative becoming the absolute. More precisely, when the self has lost its dominance, selflessness appears. Or when the pull of samsara is quite weakened, nirvana appears. Or when the relative is not all there is, the absolute appears. Dogen Zenji called what we do in meditation settling the self on the self. This is the small self on the big self. The big self, of course, is Buddha nature. Uchiyama Roshi called it opening the hand of thought. Doing this in order to release us from compulsive discriminating. Both teachers would have agreed, I'm sure, that Zazen-based practice should be continued even when explanations like the above of form and emptiness are no longer necessary or useful, except when helping others to meditate and live. Thank you. Let me pull in Jane here. Here we go. Right there.
That's good.
Good enough? Okay, here we are. Let me get back a little bit, and then we'll put us. Yeah, that's good.
That's good, yeah.
So, anybody have a question or comment? Oh yeah. Oh yes, Mike. Thank you.
In form is emptiness, emptiness is form. I just want to make sure I understand what you were saying correctly, is that our mental processes in our brain and stuff like that are form, but emptiness is when we can calm that down and clear that out and be more in the present. And the minute we get distracted into our concepts and thoughts and desires, we're back into form. Am I anywhere near correct on that?
Well, I consciously just made this talk about form as emptiness and left out the emptiness as form. So that's one thing. Yeah, what you say is true, but I tried to write about emptiness in two situations. One is a situation in emptiness in our ordinary life. Okay, the emptiness that we feel when we're just doing ordinary zazen and our mind becomes clear. But in the real, that's one meaning, but that's the surface or relative meaning of form as emptiness. But really, emptiness is the back, not just how our mind's being clear, but it's the background of everything. It's our background. One example of it is the relative thing, but this is more in the realm of the absolute. The absolute, however, not being something fancy. It's just that we become aware of something behind us that everything comes out of.
And that is Buddha nature?
That is Buddha nature, yes. And of course, ultimately, in our practice, we will experience Buddha nature. But once again, it won't be a big shebang, but it will be knowing that there's something much bigger behind us, and that is the real self. That's the true self. That's the self of settling. That's the second self of settling the self on the self. But it's us. It's not something else. It's us. But it's a different concept of us than which is a rational, relativistic one. So so even though we continue to study emptiness through our meditation, it's so that we can get to the true emptiness, which is still there, but is not something that we probably have experienced as yet. But it's there, and so it's important for us to believe that we will find that, or it will appear. Not find. Find is the wrong word. It will appear.
We
So,
already have it. We just have to we just can't recognize it. And that's why meditation helps us to calm our mind down enough to where we can recognize the Buddha nature that we already possess.
well,
Manifest it.
over the years, yes. But if you're thinking about getting it in, when you're just sitting zazen, even though it is connected to the same thing, because that emptiness is also the part of the emptiness of the big mind emptiness. But one of the most important things is that it comes out of that this understanding of it comes out of nowhere, which of course is emptiness, as I said. But we cannot find it. We cannot grasp it. One day it'll be there. But it makes no sense that it will be there, but it will be there. And that's what we need to have faith in. So Suzuki Roshi talked a lot about Buddha nature in his discussion. But for us, even though we hear about it, it's not irrational, but it certainly doesn't sound rational to us. So, that's how it has to be, because it doesn't come out of somewhere. It comes out of nowhere.
It's already there.
It's already there. Yes, it's already there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Steve.
I'm a little confused. You say to settle the big self on the little self, but there is no self.
Say that again. Jane just corrected you, maybe.
You said that the big self to settle
Oh,
the
I know.
little self,
Jane heard that.
but then you tell me there is no self.
It's the opposite. First off, it's settling the small self on the big self.
Oh, okay.
But actually, of course, ultimately, the small self comes out of the big self.
Okay, but you say there is no self.
Everything comes out of emptiness. But that emptiness isn't like empty. It's the universe. And the universe is in us. Universe is also not necessarily a good word, but it gives the size of not of being beyond being big. But it doesn't have volume for us. Of course, vastness is another definition of emptiness, which sounds like it's the opposite. But anyway, so therefore, that's what we do. When we now, this is of course just in the Zazen sense of emptiness, let's say, but even in that sense, here's us, and then here's us too. That's the small self right here. But the small self is one that's always chattering, talking to us. It comes out. And when you sit in Zazen, if you're counting your breaths, by about 3, the small self is back. but it in itself just calms down. And it just, because this is this real basis, and it just calms down, and we do settle. That's called settling the self on the self, but that's kind of a relative thing. It's the relative being settled on the absolute. And that's the real meaning of form is emptiness, which I have not mentioned today. So, but it's important to understand, repeating myself, that that is the truth, and that and that believing in it, not like in the sense of believing in God or something, because of course, anyway. So yeah, thank you, and that's it, I guess. Jane, anything to add here?
Let's see, I just wanted to say that the big self, the little self, is that which is enclosed and is exclusive and wishes only to have what we like and not have what we don't like. And so the big self, but it did, as Peter said, come out of the big self. It's actually part of the big self. It's created from our big self. But anyway, the big self is inclusive, and so it includes everything else, everything, whether we like it or not. And we become aware of our rooted nature when we start seeing the changes that people have, the changes that things have, and the changes of everything around us constantly, and realize that nothing is permanent, not even the selves of other people as well as ourselves. And so we become aware that this ground of activity is coming from us finally, but it is an expression of what we are, which is inclusive of everything that exists. So we have to slowly crack open the boundaries of a small self, and one way to do that is to settle it on the big self out of which it arose, and relax into the big self more. That is to stop resisting the changes that we don't like, but to accept that they're us also. They just happen to be a part of us that we aren't particularly fond of. But our thing is to learn to love ourselves fully. And to do that, we accept everything that comes to us and learn to love it. And that's how we love ourselves. And a lot of times it's a very unpleasant part of ourself that shows up. And many times it's a part of ourself we don't even know or recognize. And we learn to recognize it in ourselves slowly by not resisting it. And that's what resting the little self on the big self is, allowing everything in and cracking open that wall. That's what I think.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a very good addition. Anyone else? Yes. Yes, Matt.
Yeah, if I could add to that, not just, I think it's not just to admit everything in or to love everything about ourselves per se, but world at large, and those things that come to us that we don't like, that we have no control over, even those things that we have seeming control over, and learn to deal with through goodness. But there's I think an important necessity to say yes. Uh, yes to pain, Jane, you talked about, in a lecture or a Dharma talk about your migraine and your arm pain and being 2.5 hours away from medication, and the panic that arose, and I, I understand that experience. I've been through it, and just not being able to do anything until at one point you just really reach a point where you have no choice but to settle into the pain and your breath, and just stop saying no.
I think that's a very good answer. Yeah, one second,
Briefly.
Jane, and then, well, we can let Jane go first. We want to say
Can I
Jane.
just say one answer to that is true. There are many things that we don't like very much and don't want and don't think should be around. But we have to locate the source of this in us. And when we do, that's what taming the self means. And that's our primary work, is not only to understand ourselves, but to tame ourselves as well.
Yeah, and Matt, what I wanted to say is that you implied this, which is that first you accept yourself, and then you have to accept the world and what is coming to you and what is around you and everyone around you too. So, but the acceptance of yourself first is really important, because you can't accept others if you can't accept yourself. But it's the next step also.
Thank you.
So as Dogen said, um, oh, um, to forget the self is to cast off the body and mind of self and other. So that's the world, is the other, what's coming at us. Yes.
But
Yes, Mitch.
isn't also part of that statement from Dogen that you're validated by all things?
Yes, that's
Isn't that the part of the world that you're talking about?
yes, that's right. That's right. You're validated by all things. That's
Yeah.
true.
So I have a question.
Yes.
This is a weird Mitchism, so I apologize to everybody. So if I'm sitting at the North Pole, right?
If I'm what? Oh, you're
If
North
I'm
Pole.
standing on the North Pole,
Yeah.
any step I take, I'm headed south.
Yes.
So if I am living in a total nirvana, right? If I scratch my nose, am I not taking a step south? If I wonder if I take a drink of water, am I not taking a step to the south? Every time I eat, I mean, I have a human existence. I have form. Doesn't
Of course. Yeah.
so? Yes, you see what I'm trying to say? I mean, I have to live in this world,
Oh, yes.
and
Yes.
that is, I can't. I guess the ideal would be totally detached and no judgments, no discriminations. But I mean, I have to eat. I have to drink.
Oh, of course. No,
I have
that
to breathe.
definitely all those.
I have
That's
to
right.
sign into Zoom and attend Sangha. This is all small mind. It's a step to the south. Am I totally crazy? Well, I know I'm totally.
Well, in a way, yes, but settling the self on the self is actually about that also, because the most important thing, Sigrid would say that, but for a bunch of stuff, but so I probably shouldn't say it that way. But anyway, is that is being in the moment, and when you're truly in the moment, in your souths, if you're truly in the moment, then those two things of form and emptiness, that's when they become one. So you have to totally accept the form as well. You come to understand emptiness, but in fact our life, all of our life is lived in form. Of course it is. But if you're really in the moment, that form is connected to emptiness. Yes, yes, Rachel. I guess Chris' hand came up first.
So, based on what I've heard Jane say on a few occasions, maybe more than a few actually, that basically nirvana is samsara, or maybe vice versa, or both. It seems that to look at nirvana as a place where you'd be leaving if you were to partake of the necessities of a material existence is small self thinking and is actually samsaric. That
Yes.
the true vision of nirvana, or the true understanding of nirvana, is that there is no differentiation between the North Pole and anywhere south of there.
Yeah, in all cases you're in the center of the earth, right?
Right. Like you're not there, there's no place, or there is no thing you can possess that you'd be leaving or you'd be giving up ever.
Yeah, that's true, Chris. Yeah. Rachel?
Thank you, Peter. Accepting or settling in to the self, that's co-arising, is it not, with everything else? In other words, it happens at the same time. The reason I ask is directly in my mind was I've spent a lot of time in ER, and I was there yesterday, and it was strange to experience accepting the circumstance, and at the same time, a particular nurse really was um, rude, very rude, and it wasn't very cool. But the acceptance of the moment of supposed self, at that same moment, she also became acceptable in a certain sense. She was just whoever she was. Do you know what I mean? She just was who she was, operating within her own context. And so I just wonder, it's not just accepting yourself and then you look up and lo and behold, the rest of the world's all right. It, it comes as together. Is that?
Yes, it is. But ultimately, of course, you know that it's all right. That's all. Yeah. And so therefore, and so your explanation of that, that even though the nurse was actually quite rude and very obviously irritating, but still, you could see her as being her, and then to some, or maybe completely, you accepted her, even though she was irritating. You accepted her, and that would be, I guess, what's happening with settling the self on the self. We're missing up images a bit here, but it's all in you. Of course, it's all in each of us, and so from that point of view, that's what you were doing. You're opening your hand even more. Your hand is open, but I'm not going to take this one. No, I don't like that. But then, and that's our natural reaction. But at the same time, you understood, and you opened your hand again.
Oh, I love that image. Thank you, Peter. It's kind of like a vision when you're looking ahead and you see what's right in front of you. I walked this morning, and for a moment I paused, and then I realized the tree. You know what I mean? In other words, just for a moment, I saw everything in front, Perhaps
Oh.
not clearly as focusing on the one, but anyway, thank you.
Yes, that's a good image. Yeah. Anyone else? Or Jane? Anything else, Jane? Okay. Yes, Mike. Your speaker's off. Your mic is off.
John had his hand up, and I just wasn't sure
Oh,
whether.
I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, he's in the corner too. Thank you, John. I missed that.
So for me, and I think others, sometimes confusion comes to when we say no self. That doesn't mean that the world of form suddenly disappears and doesn't exist, and that we suddenly, our self drops away and never exists again.
Right.
It more so is the attachment to the self and to the desires of the self, not the actual form of self and the world around us, which is always going to be form. It is never going to suddenly everything just become emptiness. That's not what it is, because everything already is emptiness. It's only our attachment to these feelings, these desires, the ego of the self that clouds that everything is emptiness. But we're forever going to live in the world of form. We're not ever going to leave the world of form. We're just going to be able to see and experience the world of emptiness by giving our attachments to self up. And that's what emptiness actually is. It's being empty of attachments to ourself, or this form that is self. Yes?
Yes, that's very true. That's good. Yes. Yep. Anyone else? It's been a nice talk today. Oh, yes, Mike, pardon me. Your hand got up and down and up again.
I may have this completely wrong, but after listening to everybody talk and stuff like this, and your Dharma talk, I came up with an image in my mind of the small self and the big self, in the sense that the big self is the ocean, small self's a wave in the ocean. It's unique, it exists, but we accept everything else because we're a part of everything else. And so we're kind of like, that's why there is a big self and a small self. But Buddha nature and stuff, we're just a ripple on it, and we're there for a while. We're unique and stuff, and we encounter other ripples and waves, and then we fade out. But we're still part of the big mind, like an ocean, and we small mind occasionally as a wave on that ocean. If that's completely wrong, please let me know.
That sounds good. That's right. Yeah, the good image. Yep. Yes, that's exactly how it is. And this is what Rachel was getting at in a secondary part when she mentioned the interdependent reality that we live in. We are all in the yellow submarine. So, an image from the past there. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody.